September 1st, 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai paused over an intelligence brief, his surviving eye scanning lines that made him laugh in the damp heat of the operations tent. The Americans had rolled out a new fighter, thick like a bomber and broad like a transport. Its name was Hellcat. The report insisted it weighed twice as much as a Zero. To Sakai, it read like another case study in American excess. Through the tent flaps, he could see neat rows of A6M0 fighters on pierced steel planking. Sleek, agile, lethal. For 2 years, those machines had owned the sky. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen to Zero guns. This latest American attempt, swollen and ungainly, seemed destined for the same fate. What Sakai could not know, and what none of the naval aviators gathering for the morning brief imagined, was that in 30 days the supposed blunder would begin unmaking Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would post a kill ratio near 19-1, with 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed against only 270 lost in air-to-air combat. It would reshape carrier warfare, shatter Japan's air arm, and expose the Zero's reign as a triumph built on fragile assumptions. The arithmetic of air dominance was about to be redrawn by a fighter that looked wrong, felt heavy, and defied the principles Japan had refined. Within 6 months, many of the pilots laughing at the paperwork would be writing home for the last time, aware that meeting Hellcats meant near certain death. The confidence of September 1943 did not come from vanity alone. It came from numbers. Since December 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had compiled exchanges that seemed unreal. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while wrecking 347. In the Philippines, they surrendered 7 machines and destroyed 103. Over Darwin, 2 losses against 30 kills. The British Far East air arm gutted. The Dutch East Indies Air Force broken in days. The centerpiece of this supremacy was the Mitsubishi A6M0, a design that upended fighter norms. American engineers testing captured examples in 1942 doubted their own data. Here was a fighter with bomber range, biplane-like agility, and enough punch to tear down anything it reached. It felt impossible. Ace Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, later credited with 87 victories, put it bluntly in a recovered diary. Flying a Zero was like wearing wings. The machine moved at the edge of thought rather than mere stick input. American aircraft felt like trucks, powerful yet clumsy. They built warplanes as they built cars, heavy and overbuilt. The Zero earned its magic through a radical philosophy. A secret aluminum alloy, extra super duralumin, yielded structures roughly a third lighter than comparable American frameworks. Pilot armor was deleted. Self-sealing tanks were omitted. Radios were sometimes pulled to save weight. Every gram spared served performance. Early reports of the F6F reached Japanese intelligence from neutral Swedish channels in 1943 and read like exaggeration or deception. Loaded weight around 12,186 pounds. The Zero weighed about 5,800. A 334 square foot wing and a supposedly draggy radial. Ammunition measured in the thousands of rounds, armor plate, bulletproof glass, and large self-sealing tanks that held roughly 250 gallons. Captain Minoru Genda, a key planner of Pearl Harbor, reviewed the numbers at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His archived remarks were scathing. The Americans had learned nothing. This Hellcat was more of the same, trying to replace pilot skill with mass and machinery. A Zero would turn inside it all day. The math seemed to agree. With wing loading around 22 pounds per square foot, the Zero traced tight circles with roughly a 612-foot turning radius. The Hellcat's wing, loading near 36.5 pounds per square foot, implied a radius over 900 feet. In a horizontal fight, the bedrock of Japanese tactics, the Hellcat looked doomed. September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class. Yoshio Fukui escorted a reconnaissance aircraft when he spotted 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded later, was that they were B-25s on an odd heading. Then they turned, and the silhouette came clear. Single engine, a large barrel of a fuselage, wings that looked short for the mass. First encounter with a new F6F type fighter, he wrote. Initial impression, Americans have put fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. He engaged with standard doctrine, using the Zero's turn rate to swing onto the enemy's tail. He rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American to continue straight while he arced behind. Something new happened. The Hellcat refused to stay level and refused to play the turn game. It went up. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp produced around 2,000 horsepower, roughly 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai. The Hellcat clawed upward near 3,500 feet per minute. Fuki tried to follow and watched airspeed bleed away as the Zero fought gravity. At 15,000 feet, the American executed a clean hammerhead and fell behind Fukui's Zero. Fire opened at about 400 meters. Fukui reported 6 guns, not 4. The volume was shocking. He counted 17 hits in 3 seconds. He escaped by dropping into a spin. He limped home with a perforated aircraft. His wingman did not return, nor did the reconnaissance plane. The Hellcat had drawn first blood. October 5th, 1943. Task Force 14 hit Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led a dozen Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what looked like another quick raid. American carriers had been stinging and running for months, often gone before fighters could pounce. This time was different. Shiga's unit climbed to 20,000 feet. Below, 12 F6Fs cruised in 3 neat divisions. The Japanese held altitude, position, and surprise. Victory looked assured. The clash broke doctrine apart. As the Zeros dove, the Americans did not scatter and did not flat turn. They stayed in formation and slipped into a shallow dive to preserve energy. Early fire from long range did little. The Hellcats soaked up punishment with armor around the pilot, protection around the oil system, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing tanks that could drink hits. When the Zeros had spent ammunition in slash attacks, the Hellcats answered. They did not accept a horizontal duel. They converted weight into advantage. Full power climbs took them to heights where the Zero's engine starved for air. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat still had about 1,650 horsepower. The Zero struggled with roughly 900. Then came dives like hawks stooping on sparrows. Speed the Zero could not match, strikes from above, and zoom climbs back to safety. 8 Zeros fell. No Hellcats were lost. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. The 204th Air Group, gathered as Lieutenant Commander Tetsuo Tanemisu, credited with 32 victories, briefed them on new American methods. "Forget your assumptions," he said. The Americans had switched the terms of the fight. They did not accept the Zero's game. They fought with energy. Hellcat pilots stayed fast and high, trading altitude for speed in slashing passes that denied the Zero any chance to exploit superior turn. They worked in pairs, one high, one low. While you focus on one, the other is already diving. The radios Japan mocked for adding weight let them coordinate with precision. We fly as lone warriors. They fight as a single machine. By December 1943, the technology gap showed in every wreck that limped home. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2s threw about 4,500 rounds per minute. Each half-inch bullet weighed around 46 grams and left the muzzle near 2,900 feet per second, delivering on the order of 3,500 foot-pounds. The Zero's 7.7mm guns fired much lighter projectiles at lower velocity, yielding far less energy. Just as decisive was guidance. American radar-directed controllers could see Japanese raids 50 miles out and steer Hellcats into perfect ambushes. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described being hit while climbing through cloud with no warning and no visual. Hellcats dropped in exactly on heading and altitude. The Americans knew position, height, and course. Japanese pilots were fighting blind against opponents with a second sight. By January 1944, the pilot problem had become fatal. Before the war, Imperial Navy training was the gold standard. 3 full years, with graduates entering combat around 700 flight hours. Army aviators logged 500 hours or more. These were virtuosos of aerobatics and gunnery, schooled in a philosophy of air combat as art. By early 1944, naval pilots reached the line with roughly 300 hours, Army pilots with about 200. Fuel scarcity forced training in gliders. Gunnery practice shrank to a handful of rounds. Formation, instruments, and radio procedures were pared back to push bodies to the front. American pilots arrived with a minimum of 300 hours, including time and type. They had fired thousands of rounds, practiced carrier landings until the motions were automatic, and learned energy tactics over safe fields in Texas. A training officer reported sending boys to face professionals. One new ensign had never fired his guns in flight, never flown at night, and was killed 7 minutes into his first action. October 12-16, 1944. Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome committed everything to stopping U.S. carrier raids. More than 700 aircraft went forward, including the last refined trainees. Claims reported crushing American losses, with carriers and battleships allegedly sunk. Gun camera film and post-mission checks revealed the truth. American losses totaled 89 aircraft. Japanese losses reached 329, including almost every seasoned pilot left. Survivors described layered Hellcat screens at every altitude. Climb and Hellcats waited above. Dive and another layer stood below. The sky was cut into grids, each block guarded by disciplined divisions. It felt less like combat than systematic extermination. June 19th, 1944. Philippine Sea. Japan committed a rebuilt carrier force to Operation A-Go, seeking a decisive strike against American carriers. 9 carriers with about 450 aircraft faced Task Force 58's 15 carriers and roughly 956 aircraft, around 450 of them Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched 4 waves, counting on range and pilot skill. The first wave of 69 launched at 8:30. American radar saw them at roughly 150 miles. Controllers vectored Hellcats to intercept with all the advantages: altitude, sun at their backs. Approach from blind sectors. A Japanese leader saw a steel curtain stacked between 20,000 and 30,000 feet. They were at 18,000. The exchange lasted minutes. Of 69, 42 fell. Commander David McCampbell of Air Group 15 shot 7 that day, his wingman Roy rushing 6. Zeros that tried to turn found the Americans declining the invitation. High side runs, short bursts, zoom climbs, and another section finished stragglers that stalled while following. By nightfall, Japan had lost about 346 carrier aircraft and 50 land-based planes. U.S. losses from all causes were around 30. Pilots on American decks called it a turkey shoot. October 24th, 1944. Later Gulf. McCampbell set a single mission record. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted roughly 60 Japanese aircraft closing on the fleet. 90 minutes later, 9 kills were credited to him and 6 to his wingman. He reported expending all ammunition after the 9th claim. His aircraft came back unmarked, despite long odds. 7 Hellcats had broken a formation of 60 and downed 15 without loss. Those 2 peak days, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, brought McCampbell the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The aftermath produced a psychological collapse the Japanese later called Hellcat psychosis. Ozawa wrote that radar-guided fighter direction achieved the industrialization of aerial combat. Each Hellcat operated not as a lone fighter, but as a part of a vast machine. No matter how skilled Japanese pilots were engaging a system rather than individual opponents. Training hours cratered. By early 1945, Navy pilots were pushed through with 40 to 50 hours, Army pilots with 60 to 70. Kamikaze trainees often had totals in that same range. A week of flying by calendar time. April to June 1945. Okinawa. Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched nearly 2,000 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet. The Hellcat, already dominant in aerial combat, now became the fleet's shield. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia led his Flying Circus Division through the campaign, downing 23 Japanese aircraft. His team developed a new formation known as the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, 100 yards apart, sweeping through incoming waves at high speed. Each pilot covered his own slice of sky. They would make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. It was efficient, relentless, and devastating. The numbers told the story. Hellcats flew 38,038 sorties during the Okinawa campaign and claimed 2,351 victories for 249 losses, a ratio of roughly 9.5 to 1. More importantly, they prevented about 80% of kamikaze aircraft from ever reaching their targets. Each victory meant hundreds of sailors saved. The once invincible Japanese air arm had become a spent force, throwing barely trained men into one-way flights. By 1945, the technological chasm could no longer be bridged. The improved F6F model added water injection for 2,100 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers for ground attack, extra armor, and the advanced K-14 computing gun sight that automatically calculated deflection angles. It represented a level of precision the Japanese industry could not reproduce. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his experience from over 200 combats, the meeting almost killed him. "I used every maneuver I knew," he later wrote. "Loops, rolls, everything I had perfected. The Hellcat stayed with me as if tied by a rope. I survived only because my opponent made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before the fight." Even Japan's greatest tacticians found themselves powerless against a machine that combined brute strength with near-perfect reliability. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat while losing just 270 to enemy fighters, a staggering kill ratio of 19.3 to 1. It produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for three-quarters of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost to Japan was beyond recovery. Of 18,000 naval aviators who had begun the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots were alive by August 1945. The transformation from elite warrior corps to kamikaze force was the ultimate admission of defeat. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, described the logic in brutal arithmetic. If a zero attacks a carrier conventionally, its chance of success is almost zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the zero becomes a bomb, the chance of success is 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has purpose. It was the last equation Japan could write. On October 25, 1944, Ace Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming 2 Hellcats before turning home his 86th and 87th victories. The next day, while traveling as a passenger on a transport, he was shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, unarmed and helpless, fell to the very aircraft he had once bested. August 15, 1945, Atsugi Airfield. Captain Minoru Genda, who had once laughed at the Hellcat's bulk, sat listening to Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. Around him gathered the remnants of Japanese naval aviation teenagers with 40 hours of flight time, planes patched together from scraps, fuel tanks nearly dry. That same afternoon, Lieutenant Clarence Moore, of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y dive bomber after 2 p.m., the final aerial victory of the Pacific War. The Japanese pilot, unaware of the surrender, had been diving on the fleet. 2 short bursts from 6 50 caliber guns ended the last dogfight. September 1945. The occupation began. The first American aircraft to land at Atsugi after the surrender were 12 Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots and mechanics lined the runway to face their conqueror in metal form. Lieutenant Robert Vausu, an ace with 19 kills, demonstrated loops, rolls, and climbs before the stunned crowd. "You must understand," he said through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. It's stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." Post-war technical inspection revealed why. Japanese engineers examining captured Hellcats found engineering precision beyond imagination. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained nearly 3,000 machined components, all fully interchangeable between any R-2800 built. The Japanese Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting. No two engines were the same. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat after the war and concluded with painful honesty, "We built an airplane for 1941. They built a system for 1945. While we perfected the sword, they forged the factory." The production miracle itself was a weapon. At Bethpage, New York, the Grumman plant ran 24 hours a day. At peak output, one new Hellcat rolled off the line every 60 minutes. In 30 months, 12,275 were produced, a number Japan could not fathom. In 1944, Japan built 5,100 fighters of all types. The United States built 35,000. Assembly used color-coded parts, modular construction, and multiple shifts without quality loss. The contrast illustrated not just industrial scale, but industrial culture. The Hellcat changed naval warfare at its roots. Before the war, doctrine held that carriers were fragile and had to strike first to survive. The Hellcat reversed that rule. Carriers became mobile fortresses shielded by their fighter umbrella. Admiral Mark Mitcher of Task Force 58 grasped the revolution. "With the Hellcat, we no longer need to find them first. Let them come. We'll destroy them at our convenience." It was a new kind of confidence, built on both machinery and method. Beyond the machinery lay a deeper collision of civilizations. Japan's military tradition worshipped the individual warrior, the samurai ideal of skill, spirit, and death embraced. The Hellcat embodied the opposite: collective precision, mechanical strength, and survival as strategy. Where Japanese pilots fought alone as artists, Hellcat pilots operated as technicians in a vast system. The Bushido Creed forbade retreat or disengagement. Hellcat doctrine demanded it when tactical position was lost. This cultural divide made adaptation impossible even when Japanese pilots understood the new tactics intellectually. In 1962, the United States Navy hosted a Pacific War Aviation Symposium that brought together veterans from both sides. Captain David McCampbell, America's leading naval ace with 34 victories, summarized simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period." Saburo Sakai, sitting across from him, nodded. "The Zero was the better airplane," he said. "The Hellcat was the better weapon system. We never understood that difference until it was too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." The mathematics of that loss were merciless. Overall kill ratio, 19-1, 13-1, specifically against Zeros. Hellcats built 12,275 in 30 months. Zeros built between 1943 and 1945, about 6,000. American pilots trained on Hellcats, more than 5,000. Japanese combat-capable pilots by August 1945, fewer than 100. Admiral Ozawa, commander at the Philippine Sea, gave perhaps the truest eulogy. "We laughed at the Hellcat because we did not understand it. It was not merely an airplane, but the expression of an entire civilization's way of making war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces no longer existed." Saburo Sakai lived until 2000. In his final interview, he was asked again about the Hellcat. His answer was quiet. "The Zero made Japan powerful. The Hellcat made Japan realize its limits. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were only men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived did so because a Hellcat pilot allowed it. That is the ultimate defeat, to live at your enemy's mercy." The F6F Hellcat entered service twice as heavy as the Zero. Clad in armor the Zero never carried, driven by an engine Japan could not build, armed with guns it could not match, guided by radar it could not detect, flown by pilots it could not equal, and produced in numbers beyond comprehension. Japanese aviators had laughed because they did not understand that each extra pound symbolized not weakness, but the strength of a democracy capable of protecting its warriors. By the time they understood, laughter had become farewell letters, and the sky that once belonged to the rising sun was ruled by the machine they had mocked